I was in the middle of adding dust collection piping to my entire shop and therefore connecting all of my dust creating machines to my dust collecting machine. And then it came time to connect my miter saw to dust collection, and I decided that this deserves its own video because connecting a miter saw to dust collection is easy if you use the stock configuration. This miter saw has built-in dust collection in the form of this dust boot in the back that sucks up air and dust off of the blade and out the back here. And as you can see, that's very easy to connect to dust collection because I've already done it. But this sort of built-in miter saw dust collection isn't known to be hugely effective. So in this video, I would like to substantially improve on the dust collection abilities of this miter saw. Join me. I've been holding the safety trigger this whole time. I'm safe. As I already mentioned, this miter saw did come with built-in dust collection, as most do, in the form of this dust boot here. And I've actually found this dust boot to be quite effective if I take a sliding cut, because during a sliding cut, the angle of attack from the blade to the wood is such that the chips shoot upward and into this dust boot. But if I take a straight down chop cut, or really any other type of cut, well, the chips fly any direction they want to. Sometimes they go up into this dust chute, but sometimes they don't. Most of the time they don't. So I would like to modify this saw so that I can take any type of cut I want to and the dust will be sucked up. Which is why I'm going to be replacing the auxiliary fence that came with this saw, these little aluminum wings here, with one made out of wood, and it's going to extend all the way across the saw. And in the middle, it'll have a grid work of holes, and behind it will be a dust box that's hooked up to the dust collector so that any dust or debris that hits that fence will be sucked into the grid work of holes and into the dust collection system. It'll also double as a zero clearance fence, which is nice. Now, unfortunately, since I plan to build a fence right here with a dust box behind it, this piece of the saw is in my way. This is the mounting point for the zero clearance splitter that went right about here, and it's a useful safety device. But I'm going to have a zero clearance fence, so I won't need it. And since it's in my way, I'm going to have to do something painful and cut this piece off. It's going to be painful because this is a cast part of the saw. It's all aluminum, and it's going to hurt to cut through because it's irreversible. But I got to do what I got to do. While I'm here working on the miter saw, I'm going to replace these plastic inserts with a zero clearance insert made out of this board of mahogany here. And finally, oh yes. And now to start work on the fence extension, which I'll be making out of these two mahogany scraps that I glued together the night before. After all that routing, rerouting, and fine-tuning, I can now do this with the mahogany board. It's lovely. And to clamp it in place, I just used the screw clamps in back that were used for the auxiliary fence that came with the saw. Off camera, I made a couple of modifications to my auxiliary fence here. First of all, I cut a couple notches in the back here, so instead of sliding in from the side, it will now drop in from the top, and it still clamps in place just like before. And I've cut it to length, so it's the proper length now. Also off camera, I cut this little piece of mahogany that is the shape of the Pizza Hut logo, and you flip it upside down, and that's the piece to fill this little gap here. And now I just need to glue that in place. And after the glue has dried on the piece, my auxiliary fence now looks like this, which I think looks rather stunning, especially for a fence on a miter saw. Now I'd like to get to work making the dust box that's going to fill in the back area here, and to make my life difficult, I'm going to make it circular to match the base of this miter saw. And the material I'm going to be using for that is more mahogany. This is a wide panel of mahogany that I edge glued up last night. The first step to making this dust box is to make a half circle template out of plywood. The plan here was to use a flush trim bit in the router and the plywood template as, well, a template, and batch out a bunch of matching curves. Unfortunately, this didn't work because the orientation of the grain meant I had to route uphill against the end grain, which... So instead I just glued up all of the rough cut curves into a wall and refined the shape of the entire glued up unit on the disc and spindle sander. Next I need to route a grid work of slots into the front of this fence for the dust to be sucked through, and to do that I'm going to use the router table with this spinny angry bit here. Maybe I should have tackled dust collection on the router table before the miter saw. Just maybe. The two bottom slots were too small for a round over bit, so I had to round over the edges by hand with a tiny diamond pick. Now I may have a little bit of bias, but that looks good. I like it. This lovely curvaceous shape that I just carved out on the sanders is going to sit behind the auxiliary fence right about here. But as of right now, this does not sit flush with the back of the auxiliary fence. So I need to cut some notches down here so it can clear the primary fence. After cutting out the notches on the corners, this fits on the back perfectly. Absolutely perfectly. And now you can see why I chose to orient the grain direction the way I did, because this is side grain and I can make a perfect glue joint against the back of the auxiliary fence. As opposed to if this were in grain, I'd have to do some sort of reinforcement, but I don't because it's side grain to side grain. And the last thing I have to do to enclose this box is make a top for it. And the end result after that glue up? The most beautiful dust shroud I will probably ever make. For some reason, I feel the urge to make all of my shop fixtures look very nice. Why don't I make a salad bowl or something that should look pretty? No, this is going to go behind a miter saw fence and be out of sight except for this part and bits of this if you happen to stick your head behind the saw. Oh well, time to glue this to the back of the fence. Now comes the fun part, connecting this lovely circular dust box to the dust collection with this PVC pipe here. And because I want to have the miter saw be able to, it's rubbing against the wall, be able to swing in either direction and either extreme, I'm going to have the pipe come out on the side of the dust box on both sides, I'm going to have it on both sides just for more airflow. So now I have the problem of how do I drill a hole with a hole saw in the side of this circular dust box to come out at an angle. My first thought was to tilt the drill press table sideways, clamp the fence to that, and then attack it with the hole saw from the side. However, my drill press is far too small for that to work. So what I've done is I've glued up 2 more blocks of mahogany, sandwiches, same grain direction as every other piece on here. What I'm going to do is take the hole saw of the appropriate size, drill through the side here, then I will cut a profile on the side of these blocks so that they fit flush against this lovely curved dust box. Then I will use these as a guide block and drill the hole saw through here, which will then drill into here, all lined up and everything, and these blocks will then be glued in place and there'll be extra support for the pipe to sit in. For what this is excessively beautiful. Unfortunately, there was an incident during the glue up of these ports on the back here. It was an incident involving this port right here. I put the clamp right in the middle here, right where it's the weakest, and put too much clamping pressure on it, and broke it right in half. So you can see down here that it's all fractured because instead of making a new part, I frantically tried to glue all the bits together while the glue was still wet. And amazingly, from the top, you can't even see the crack anymore unless you really, really look for it. So all things considered, since this is on the bottom, I'd say that my hack job of putting together the broken pieces was a success. And to fill in these gaps of the curve here, since I didn't get the curve perfectly matched, I used the old sawdust and glue trick, mixed them together and then jammed them in there and sanded it away, and it doesn't look terrible. Don't think I'd do that on a piece of furniture, but again, this is a miter saw fence, so it didn't do too bad. The only evidence from the top that this glue up didn't go as planned is that it's not exactly straight up here, but again, miter saw fence. All is forgiven. Also, you can probably tell I gave it a coat of poly, one single coat, and the only thing I have left to do now is to drill out through these ports. Now to complete this whole thing, I've got my 2 little curve cut sections of PVC that slot in the side. And I'm going to pin them in place from underneath. Okay, those aren't going anywhere. Now I guess I just hook it up to the dust collection, put it on the saw and everything. And here it is all hooked up. Off the main dust collection line here, I have a 2 to 4 splitter. The top part of the splitter goes to the built-in dust collection on the miter saw. And the bottom part goes to another splitter, which splits it off into 2.5 inch dust collection lines, which go into either side of the dust collection box. Now I've already turned the dust collector on with this hooked up, and I was disappointed with the lack of airflow going to this dust box down here. It was too much going to the built-in dust collection. So what I did was I took one of the cores of mahogany that I cut out with a hole saw, and I cored it out, made a baffle out of it. I even round over the edge here for some aerodynamics, and I put it in here, the idea of which is to decrease the amount of airflow coming out of this port and to increase the airflow going into the dust box down here, and it seems to have done the trick. So now I think it's about time we make the first ever cut into this insert plate and the fence and see how it all works. Dust collector on. Open the blast gate. Airflow felt. Let's make the cut. Saw all the way out down here. Oh, it hurts. And there you have it. Now I have to admit, the dust collection of this thing still isn't perfect. Certainly an improvement over how it started out, but it's not perfect. And that's largely because the design of this auxiliary fence was compromised from the beginning. I wanted it to be two things. I wanted this to be a zero clearance fence, and I wanted it to have built-in dust collection. That's why I chose the grid work here instead of just a wide open box. A wide open box would have been more efficient as far as dust collection, but then it wouldn't have been a zero clearance fence now, would it? The downside is that some of the dust will bounce off the face of this grid work and not be sucked into the dust collection system. A compromise that I'm okay with because, again, it looks nice. Also, it's a zero clearance fence, and I have a zero clearance insert now. It's all zero clearance, and it's more effective than how it started out, so I consider this a win. Plus, it looks nice. If I mentioned that, I'm very happy with the way this thing looks. And if you're wondering, this box does allow for mitered cuts, but it does not allow for beveled cuts. But that's okay because I literally never did bevel cuts with this saw anyway. That's it. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. I've got to work on the rest of my dust collection system now, because not everything is hooked up still.